He filmed me without consent for cute memories. I gave him a memory he'll never forget. I was folding laundry in our apartment when I found the camera hidden inside the alarm clock on my nightstand. It was a Wednesday afternoon in March, and I'd just gotten home from my nursing shift at the hospital. The clock had been sitting there for 8 months, ever since my boyfriend Derek moved in with me. I'd knocked it over reaching for my phone, and the back panel popped open, revealing a tiny lens and a memory card slot. My hands started shaking so badly I dropped the whole thing on the hardwood floor. The SD card fell out, and I just stared at it lying there next to the broken clock pieces, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. Derek wouldn't be home for another 3 hours. He worked as a project manager at a tech startup downtown and usually stayed late on Wednesdays for team meetings. I picked up the memory card with 2 fingers like it might burn me and walked to my laptop. The card had 64 gigabytes of storage and was nearly full. I plugged it into my computer and opened the first video file, already knowing what I'd find but needing to see it anyway. The footage showed our bedroom from the nightstand angle, perfectly framed to capture the bed and part of the bathroom doorway. The timestamp said it was from 3 nights ago. I watched myself come out of the bathroom in my towel, watched myself get dressed for bed, watched myself do things I do when I think I'm completely alone. My stomach turned over and I had to pause the video. There were hundreds of files on this card, organized by date going back 6 months. I clicked on random ones and they were all the same. Me sleeping, me changing clothes, me walking around naked after showers, me doing everything people do in their own bedrooms when they believe they have privacy. Some videos were time-stamped from nights Derek was supposedly working late or out with his friends. He'd been watching this footage, collecting it, doing God knows what with it. I sat there at my desk for maybe 20 minutes just staring at the screen, feeling like my entire sense of reality had cracked open. This was the man I'd been dating for 2 years, the man I'd introduced to my parents, the man I'd been thinking about marrying someday. I finally closed the laptop and went through our apartment looking for more cameras. I found one in the living room hidden inside a decorative plant on the bookshelf, angled toward the couch where I usually sat to watch TV. Another one in the bathroom vent, which made me physically gag when I discovered it. The bathroom camera was positioned to see the entire room, including the shower. I pulled all 3 devices out and lined them up on the kitchen counter, then went back to my laptop and started going through every single video file methodically. The earliest footage was from 8 months ago, right after Derek moved in. He'd installed these cameras within days of getting keys to my apartment. Some videos had been marked with stars or moved into special folders with labels like best angles and highlights. I felt violated in a way I'd never experienced before. Like my skin had been peeled back and someone had been examining everything underneath without my knowledge or permission. Every private moment I'd had in my own home for the past 6 months had been recorded and cataloged by someone I trusted completely. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek saying he'd be home around 7 and asking if I wanted him to pick up Thai food on the way. I stared at that message, at the casual normalcy of it, and felt rage building in my chest so intense I could barely breathe. I texted back saying Thai food sounded great, and then I got to work. I spent the next 2 hours copying every single video file from all 3 memory cards onto my laptop and an external hard drive for backup. Then I carefully put the cameras back exactly where I'd found them, making sure the angles were identical to how Derek had positioned them. I swept up the broken clock pieces and threw them away, then placed the alarm clock back on my nightstand with the camera still inside, but now I knew it was there watching me. The bathroom vent cover went back up. The plant on the bookshelf returned to its spot. Everything looked exactly like it had this morning, except now I was aware and Derek had no idea that I knew. Derek came home at 7:15 carrying bags of Thai food and smiling like everything was normal. He kissed me on the cheek and started unpacking containers of pad thai and curry onto our kitchen table. I watched him move around the apartment, this person I thought I knew completely, and tried to match his behavior with what I'd discovered. He asked about my shift at the hospital, and I gave him the standard recap about difficult patients and staffing shortages while studying his face for any sign of guilt or deception. There was nothing. Just the same Derek I'd been living with for months, laughing at his own jokes and stealing bites of my spring rolls. We ate dinner and watched an episode of some cooking competition show, and the whole time I was hyper-aware of the camera in the fake plant 12 feet away, recording both of us on the couch. Derek had his arm around me and kept making comments about the contestants, completely relaxed and comfortable. I wondered if he'd watch this footage later, review this moment of me sitting next to him with no clue about what he'd been doing. After dinner, I told Derek I had a headache and was going to bed early. He said he'd stay up and finish some work emails, which probably meant he'd review today's camera footage once I was asleep. I went to the bedroom and changed into pajamas, performing my normal routine while being filmed, and got into bed. I lay there in the dark for an hour, listening to Derek move around the apartment, hearing his laptop keyboard clicking in the living room. Around 10 o'clock, he came to bed and fell asleep within minutes like he didn't have a care in the world. I stayed awake most of the night, staring at the ceiling and planning. The violation I felt was transforming into something colder and more focused. Derek had been documenting my private life without permission for months, treating me like a subject to study and collect. I was going to document what happened next, and I'd make sure he understood exactly how it felt to have control taken away. Thursday morning, Derek left for work at his usual time around 8:30. I called in sick to the hospital, something I rarely did, and my supervisor approved it without questions since I'd covered extra shifts last month. As soon as Derek's car pulled out of the parking lot, I got dressed and drove to an electronics store across town. I bought 4 wireless cameras with cloud storage, the expensive kind that uploaded footage automatically and couldn't be erased even if someone destroyed the physical devices. The sales clerk gave me a weird look when I bought so many but didn't ask questions. I also stopped at an office supply store and bought a small lockbox with a combination lock. Back at the apartment, I hid one camera in the bedroom bookshelf behind some paperbacks where it had a clear view of Derek's side of the bed and his desk. Another went in the living room ceiling light fixture, pointing down at the couch and coffee table. The third I mounted inside the kitchen cabinet above the refrigerator with a view of the whole room. The last one I installed in the hallway closet with the door cracked just enough to see the apartment entrance. I spent the rest of Thursday setting up the cloud storage accounts and making sure all 4 cameras were recording properly. Everything uploaded automatically to a secure server that required my password to access. I created a separate email account using a fake name and set up the cloud storage through that, then wrote down all the login information and locked it in the safe box, which I hid in the back of my closet behind shoeboxes. Then I went through the apartment again looking for any other cameras I might have missed the first time. I checked inside vents, behind picture frames, inside light fixtures, even inside the toilet tank. I didn't find anything else, but the search made me feel slightly insane, questioning every object in my own home. By the time Derek got back from work that evening, I'd transformed our apartment into a surveillance system that captured everything, and he had no idea he was now the one being watched and recorded constantly. I felt slightly sick about becoming the thing I hated, but I pushed that feeling down deep. Friday and Saturday passed in this weird alternate reality where I acted completely normal, while knowing terrible things Derek didn't know I knew. We had dinner with his coworker Nathan and Nathan's girlfriend on Friday night, and I watched Derek charm everyone at the table with stories about his latest project at work. He was funny and attentive and kept his hand on my knee under the table, playing the role of devoted boyfriend perfectly. I wondered if he'd recorded our most intimate moments and if he'd shared those videos with anyone else. The thought made me lose my appetite completely, but I forced myself to eat and laugh at appropriate moments. Saturday, we drove to his parents' house for his mom's birthday lunch. She hugged me and said how happy she was that Derek had found someone so perfect for him. His dad showed me their new deck and talked about how Derek had always been such a responsible, trustworthy kid growing up. I smiled and nodded while thinking about the cameras hidden in our bathroom vent, about all the footage of me showering and using the toilet that Derek had collected. Sunday morning, I woke up before Derek and went through his laptop while he was still sleeping. His password was my birthday, which felt like a cruel irony now. I found a folder buried deep in his file system labeled security footage, with subfolders for each camera location. Inside were all the videos I'd already seen on the memory cards plus dozens more from the past few days. He'd been regularly transferring files from the cameras to his laptop and categorizing them. Some folders had titles that made my skin crawl, like bathroom compilation and bedroom highlights. There were also folders containing still images, screenshots he'd pulled from videos and saved separately, photos of me naked, me sleeping, me in vulnerable private moments. I copied everything onto my external hard drive, adding to the evidence I was building. Then I searched his email and found messages to himself with video attachments, apparently his way of backing things up to the cloud. I forwarded all those emails to my secret account, then deleted the sent items from his trash so he wouldn't know. I found the real shock when I dug deeper into Derek's browsing history. He'd been active on several forums where people discussed hidden camera footage and traded videos. His username on these sites was Observer24, and he'd been a member for over 3 years, long before he met me. He'd posted dozens of times asking for technical advice about camera placement and storage solutions. But he'd never posted any of my footage publicly as far as I could tell from his account history, which was something at least. The forums themselves were disgusting, full of people sharing videos of women who clearly didn't know they were being filmed. I took screenshots of everything, including Derek's posts and profile information, then cleared my tracks in his browser history so he wouldn't know anyone had been looking. By the time Derek woke up around 9, I was back in bed pretending to scroll through my phone. He stretched and asked if I wanted to get brunch, and I said sure, like nothing was wrong. Like I hadn't just discovered he was part of an online community of voyeurs. Monday morning, I went to work at the hospital and functioned on autopilot through my 12-hour shift. My patients got good care because my training took over, but my mind was elsewhere planning next steps. During my lunch break, I called a law firm that specialized in privacy violations and made an appointment for Wednesday afternoon. The receptionist asked what kind of case I was calling about, and I gave her a brief summary that made her go quiet for a few seconds before saying the lawyer would definitely want to meet with me. I also called a locksmith and scheduled them to come Thursday morning to change all the locks on my apartment. Derek wasn't on the lease, just me, so I had the legal right to do that. When I got home Monday evening, Derek had cooked dinner, which was unusual for him. He'd made salmon and vegetables and set the table with candles like we were celebrating something. I asked what the occasion was, and he said he'd gotten a promotion at work, moving up to senior project manager with a significant raise. We ate dinner, and Derek talked about his new responsibilities and the team he'd be managing. He seemed genuinely excited, more animated than I'd seen him in months. He said this promotion meant we could start looking at houses instead of renting, maybe start planning our future more seriously. He reached across the table and took my hand and said he'd been thinking about proposing soon, maybe this summer. My heart dropped into my stomach because 3 days ago that statement would have made me happier than anything. Now it just felt like another violation. Another way he was trying to build a life with me while secretly recording every private moment I had. I smiled and said that sounded wonderful, and I watched his face light up with happiness while the camera in the kitchen cabinet recorded both of us having this conversation. I excused myself to use the bathroom and stood at the sink splashing cold water on my face, trying to hold everything together long enough to execute my plan. Tuesday evening, Derek said he had to work late for a presentation on Wednesday morning. He left the apartment around 6 carrying his laptop and said he'd probably be at the office until midnight. I watched him drive away from our bedroom window, then immediately went to his desk and opened his laptop again. He'd left it behind, taking his work computer instead, which meant his personal laptop with all the surveillance footage was right here unguarded. I spent the next 4 hours going through everything systematically. I found more forum posts where Derek discussed the subjects he was recording, talking about me like I was an experiment or a specimen to study. He described our apartment layout to other forum members and gave advice about hiding cameras in different types of spaces. One post from 2 months ago said he was considering installing a camera in our car, and I made a mental note to check my vehicle tomorrow. I copied every single thing I found onto multiple drives and uploaded it all to my secure cloud storage. The evidence kept mounting into something overwhelming. Derek had spreadsheets tracking which videos were his favorites, rating different footage on various criteria that made me feel physically ill to read. He had documents outlining his camera setup with diagrams of our apartment showing every angle he'd captured. There were shopping lists for new camera equipment he wanted to buy and notes about rooms he wanted to add surveillance to next, including my car and potentially my locker at the hospital if he could figure out access. This wasn't just casual boundary crossing or a stupid mistake. This was systematic, planned, obsessive documentation of my entire life. Derek had turned me into a project, something to surveil and catalog and collect. I found a journal file where he'd written entries about what he'd observed on the cameras, analyzing my behavior and routines like a scientist studying an animal. The clinical detachment in his writing was somehow worse than if he'd written something sexual or emotional. Wednesday morning, I called in sick again and went to meet with the attorney, a woman named Patricia Hernandez who specialized in privacy law and revenge porn cases. I brought my laptop and external drive with all the evidence I'd collected. Patricia's office was in a modern building downtown, all glass and steel, and she met me in a private conference room. I showed her everything, including the hidden cameras I'd found, the video files Derek had collected, the forum posts, the emails, all of it. She took notes and asked detailed questions about timelines and what Derek had said or done that I could remember. After 2 hours, she sat back in her chair and said I had one of the strongest cases for illegal surveillance she'd ever seen. Derek had violated multiple state and federal laws by recording me in private spaces without consent, especially in the bathroom where there is a heightened expectation of privacy. Patricia said we could pursue both criminal charges and a civil lawsuit that would likely result in significant damages. Patricia explained the legal process in detail and what I should expect if we moved forward. She said the criminal case would involve police reports and potentially an investigation into Derek's online activities and the forums he'd participated in. The district attorney's office would decide whether to press charges, but with this much evidence, it was almost certain they would. The civil case would be separate, suing Derek for damages including emotional distress and violation of privacy rights. She estimated the civil suit could result in awards ranging from $50,000 to several $100,000 depending on a jury's response to the evidence. But she warned me that pursuing legal action would mean everything becoming public, possibly ending up in news coverage, and definitely requiring me to testify in detail about the most private aspects of my life. I told her I understood and wanted to move forward with everything. We spent another hour going through paperwork and planning strategy. Patricia said she'd file the civil suit by end of week and contact the police department to initiate the criminal investigation. I left Patricia's office feeling like I'd set something massive in motion that couldn't be stopped. Wednesday evening, Derek came home in a good mood talking about how his presentation had gone well and his boss had praised him in front of the whole team. He suggested we celebrate by going out for dinner at this Italian place we both loved. I agreed, and we drove across town to the restaurant, and the whole time I was thinking about how this was probably one of our last normal evenings together before everything exploded. We ordered wine and pasta, and Derek talked about wanting to take a vacation this summer, maybe rent a beach house for a week somewhere. He asked where I wanted to go, and I suggested California, knowing that none of these plans would actually happen. I kept thinking about Patricia's words about the legal process, about police investigations and courtrooms and everything becoming public knowledge. Part of me felt terrified about what was coming, but a stronger part felt righteous and determined. Thursday morning was when everything started happening at once. The locksmith arrived at 8 and changed all the locks on the apartment. I had him install a deadbolt too, something that could only be locked from inside, and I kept all the new keys. Derek was at work and had no idea his keys would no longer work when he got home. Around 10, Patricia called saying she'd filed the civil lawsuit and contacted the police department's cybercrime unit, who were very interested in the case. A detective named Raymond Morris would be calling me later today to set up an interview. She'd also sent Derek's employer a letter informing them of the lawsuit and the nature of the allegations, which was standard practice since it involved technology and could potentially implicate company resources if Derek had used work devices. Patricia said Derek would probably be suspended pending their internal investigation. I thanked her and spent the rest of the morning packing all of Derek's belongings into boxes and garbage bags, methodically clearing out every trace of him from my apartment. Detective Morris called around 2 in the afternoon and asked if I could come to the police station to give a formal statement. I drove over immediately and spent 3 hours in an interview room going through everything with him and his partner, a woman named Detective Angela Foster. They were both sympathetic and professional, treating me with respect that helped me get through describing all the intimate details of what Derek had recorded. I showed them the cameras I'd found and the video evidence I'd collected. Detective Morris said they'd be getting a warrant for Derek's electronics and would probably execute it tomorrow at his workplace to preserve evidence before he could delete anything. He said the district attorney had already reviewed the case preliminarily and was planning to file multiple felony charges, including unlawful surveillance and voyeurism. Each charge carried potential prison time, and with the amount of footage Derek had collected and his participation in those online forums, they expected he'd face significant penalties. I got home from the police station around 6 in the evening, exhausted and emotionally drained. Derek's car was already in the parking lot, and I could hear him trying his key in the door as I walked up the stairs. He saw me coming, and his face was confused and frustrated. "My key isn't working," he said, jiggling the handle. "Did something break with the lock?" I stopped a few feet away from him and said, "I changed the locks. Your stuff is packed and ready to go." His expression went through several transformations, from confusion to disbelief to something like fear. "What are you talking about?" he asked. "Why would you change the locks?" I pulled out my phone and showed him a photo of one of the cameras I'd found, the one from the bedroom alarm clock. "I found these," I said quietly. "All 3 of them. I know what you've been doing." Derek's face went completely white. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out for several seconds. "I can explain," Derek finally said, his voice shaking. "It's not what you think. I was just trying to keep the apartment secure, make sure nothing got stolen if someone broke in." I stared at him and felt something like pity mixed with disgust. He was still trying to lie, even though I'd caught him completely. "You put a camera in the bathroom vent," I said. "You've been recording me for 6 months without my consent. You joined forums where people trade this kind of footage. You have folders on your computer labeled bathroom compilation. Don't insult me by pretending this was about security." Derek's whole body seemed to deflate, and he leaned against the wall. "How long have you known?" he asked quietly. "Since Wednesday," I said. "I've spent the last few days collecting evidence and talking to lawyers and police. They're getting a warrant for all your electronics. You're being sued for damages, and you're probably going to be charged with multiple felonies." Derek slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor in the hallway. "Please," he said, and his voice cracked. "Please don't do this. I'll delete everything. I'll get help. I'll do whatever you want. Just don't go to the police." I looked down at him and felt nothing but cold certainty. "It's already done," I said. "I filed the lawsuit this morning. The detective is getting a warrant tomorrow. Your boss received a letter about the allegations today, so you're probably going to be suspended or fired. I've documented everything you recorded and everything you posted online. There's no taking this back." Derek started crying, actually crying with tears running down his face. "I love you," he said desperately. "I know I messed up, but I love you, and we can work through this." I crouched down so I was at his eye level. "You don't violate people you love," I said clearly. "You turned me into a subject to observe and catalog. You treated me like I was yours to surveil whenever you wanted. That's not love. That's ownership." I stood up and went inside the apartment, coming back with 2 large boxes containing his clothes and personal items. I set them in the hallway next to him. "Everything else is in my car," I said. "I'm driving it to your parents' house tomorrow and leaving it all there. Don't contact me again. Don't come back here. If you show up or try to reach out, I'm documenting that for the restraining order my lawyer is preparing." Derek looked at the boxes and then at me with this expression of complete devastation. "What about my stuff from inside?" he asked weakly. "My laptop and my desk things." I felt my jaw tighten. "The laptop is evidence now," I said. "The police will be collecting it along with everything else when they execute the warrant. You should probably get a criminal defense attorney before they show up at your office tomorrow." I went back inside and locked the door behind me with the new deadbolt, and I stood there listening to Derek cry in the hallway for maybe 5 minutes before I heard him finally gather his boxes and leave. Friday morning at 9, Detective Morris called to tell me they'd executed the warrant at Derek's workplace. He'd been escorted from the building by security, and his work computer and personal electronics were seized. They'd also gotten a warrant for his parents' house where he'd apparently gone to stay, and found additional storage drives with more surveillance footage from previous relationships. Derek had been doing this for years with multiple partners, not just me. Detective Morris said the district attorney was filing 8 felony counts, including unlawful surveillance, voyeurism, and distribution of private sexual images for the forum activities. Derek was being arrested and would be arraigned Monday morning. I sat down on my couch and just breathed for a minute, letting that information settle. I'd expected he might have recorded other people, but knowing for certain made everything feel worse somehow. How many women had been violated by this man? How long had he been perfecting his surveillance techniques before he met me? The news coverage started over the weekend. A local reporter had picked up the story from court filings and ran an article Saturday afternoon about a tech worker arrested for secretly recording his girlfriend. They didn't use my name because I was the victim, but Derek's full name was published along with his photo and the charges he faced. My phone started blowing up with messages from friends who'd seen the article and connected the dots about Derek. People I hadn't talked to in months reached out asking if I was okay, if I needed anything. My best friend Amanda drove over Saturday evening and stayed the whole night, bringing wine and food, and just sitting with me while I processed everything. She kept apologizing for not seeing any signs, for thinking Derek seemed like such a great guy when they'd met at parties and dinners. I told her there were no signs because Derek was good at compartmentalizing, keeping his public persona completely separate from his private violations. Sunday afternoon, Derek's mother called me sobbing. She said she couldn't believe what was happening, that Derek had always been such a good son, that there must be some mistake or misunderstanding. I told her gently but firmly that there was no mistake, that I'd found the cameras and the footage myself, that Derek had confessed when confronted. She asked me to consider dropping the charges, said Derek's father had a heart condition, and this stress might kill him. I felt bad for her, but I also felt angry that she was asking me to protect Derek instead of acknowledging what he'd done. He committed crimes, I told her. He violated my privacy for months, and apparently did the same thing to other women before me. I'm not responsible for the consequences of his actions. She hung up after that, and sent me several long text messages begging me to reconsider, saying Derek had promised to get therapy, saying he was talking about suicide. I showed those messages to Patricia, who said to document everything, but not respond further. Derek's arraignment Monday morning resulted in him being released on bail, with conditions including no contact with me, surrendering his passport, and wearing a GPS monitor. The prosecutor argued for higher bail, but the judge set it at $25,000, which Derek's parents apparently paid. Patricia attended the hearing and called me afterward with updates. The prosecutor had offered a plea deal requiring Derek to plead guilty to 4 felony counts in exchange for dropping the others, with a recommended sentence of 3 to 5 years in prison plus mandatory registration as a sex offender. Derek's attorney asked for time to consider the offer. Patricia said if Derek rejected the plea deal, we'd be going to trial, which could take months or years to resolve. Either way, the civil lawsuit was proceeding separately, and she expected we'd reach a settlement or verdict within a year. The evidence was so overwhelming that Derek's legal team would probably recommend settling rather than risk a trial. I went back to work at the hospital Tuesday and immediately felt the weight of everyone knowing what happened. The news coverage had been extensive enough that my coworkers recognized Derek's photo and figured out I was the unnamed victim. Most people were supportive, offering kind words and giving me space when I needed it, but some were weird about it, avoiding eye contact or changing conversations when I entered the break room. One of the older nurses said something about how couples need to trust each other, and maybe I shouldn't have snooped through Derek's things, which made me so angry I had to walk away before I said something I'd regret. My supervisor pulled me aside and asked if I needed time off or wanted to talk to the hospital's employee assistance program. I said I was fine working, that keeping busy actually helped me not think about everything constantly. She was understanding and told me to let her know if that changed. The hardest part was functioning normally when I felt fundamentally changed by what happened. Simple activities like getting dressed in the morning made me hyper-aware of privacy and boundaries. I found myself checking my apartment obsessively for new cameras even though Derek was gone, and there couldn't be any. I'd become paranoid about technology, covering my laptop camera with tape and being suspicious of any device with a lens. Amanda suggested I start therapy and gave me the name of a counselor who specialized in trauma and violation. I made an appointment for the following week, figuring I needed professional help processing everything that had happened. The violation of having my most private moments recorded without consent had created this wound that wasn't healing on its own. Every time I thought about Derek watching footage of me, reviewing his favorite clips, categorizing my private behaviors, I felt sick and angry and violated all over again. 3 weeks after Derek's arrest, Patricia called with news that he'd accepted the plea deal. He'd pleaded guilty to 4 felony counts and would be sentenced in 6 weeks after a pre-sentence investigation. The prosecutor expected the judge to follow the recommended 3 to 5 year prison term. Derek would also be required to register as a sex offender for at least 20 years, potentially life depending on the sentencing specifics. The plea deal included cooperation with authorities investigating the online forums he'd participated in, which was leading to more arrests of other men who'd been trading surveillance footage. Patricia said Derek's cooperation might get him a slightly reduced sentence, but probably not by much given the severity of his crimes. She also said Derek's legal team had reached out about settling the civil lawsuit. They were offering $200,000 to avoid going to trial. Patricia recommended I consider it seriously since a trial could be traumatic, and there was always risk with juries despite our strong evidence. I thought about the settlement offer for several days, discussing it with Amanda and my therapist and my parents who'd flown in to support me after learning what happened. $200,000 was life-changing money, enough to pay off my student loans and put a down payment on a house. But accepting it felt like letting Derek buy his way out of full accountability. My therapist helped me understand that the criminal case was about justice, and the civil case was about compensation for harm caused. Taking the settlement didn't diminish Derek's criminal conviction or the fact that he'd be in prison for years. It was simply me accepting payment for the very real damage he'd caused to my mental health and sense of safety. I ultimately decided to accept the settlement with one condition, that Derek also pay for 3 years of therapy for me. His legal team agreed immediately, probably relieved to avoid trial, and we signed the settlement agreement the following week. Derek's sentencing hearing was in late May, about 2 months after everything started. I attended with Patricia, sitting in the courtroom gallery while the judge heard statements from the prosecutor, Derek's attorney, and Derek himself. The prosecutor presented evidence of the extensive surveillance Derek had conducted and his participation in the online forums. They revealed that Derek had recorded 3 other women before me over a span of 5 years, with similar patterns of hidden cameras in bedrooms and bathrooms. One of those women was in the courtroom, too, a woman named Lisa, who I'd never met but who'd gone through the same violation I had. We made eye contact across the room and something passed between us, recognition of shared trauma and survival. Derek gave a statement apologizing and claiming he'd been struggling with mental health issues and technology addiction. He said he knew what he'd done was wrong and accepted full responsibility. The judge was a stern older woman named Margaret Blackwell who listened to everything without much visible reaction. When it was time for sentencing, she looked directly at Derek and said his crimes represented a profound violation of trust and basic human dignity. She said Derek had turned multiple women's homes into surveillance systems, robbing them of privacy and safety in the places they should have felt most secure. She noted the premeditated nature of his actions, the extensive planning and technical sophistication, and his participation in communities that normalize this predatory behavior. Judge Blackwell sentenced Derek to 6 years in prison, the maximum under the plea agreement, and lifetime registration as a sex offender. She also ordered him to pay restitution to all 4 victims and mandated intensive therapy focusing on his harmful behaviors. Derek's face crumpled when he heard the sentence, and his mother started crying loudly in the back of the courtroom. I felt relief wash over me, knowing he'd be in prison for years and marked as dangerous for the rest of his life. After the sentencing, Lisa approached me in the courthouse hallway. She was younger than me, maybe mid-20s, with dark hair and a wary expression. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for reporting him and following through with everything. I didn't have the courage when it happened to me, and I've regretted it ever since." I told her she had nothing to apologize for, that everyone handles trauma differently. We exchanged contact information, and she mentioned there were 2 other women Derek had recorded who hadn't come to court today. I wondered how many more victims might exist that we didn't even know about, how many cameras Derek had hidden in how many homes over the years. Lisa and I stayed in touch after that, occasionally meeting for coffee and supporting each other through the ongoing aftermath of what Derek had done to us. Having someone who truly understood the specific violation we'd experienced helped more than any amount of therapy. Life slowly returned to something resembling normal over the following months, though I'd been changed fundamentally by everything that happened. I moved to a different apartment across town, wanting a fresh start in a place Derek had never been. I was more careful about who I dated and what information I shared with new people. Maybe overly cautious, but that seemed better than being too trusting. The settlement money paid off my debts and gave me financial security I'd never had before. I used some of it to go back to school part-time for my nurse practitioner degree, something I'd always wanted but couldn't afford. My therapist helped me work through the trauma and slowly rebuild my sense of safety and privacy. I learned that healing wasn't linear, that some days I'd feel fine and other days I'd have panic attacks triggered by seeing a device that looked like it might contain a camera. One afternoon, about a year after Derek's sentencing, I was having lunch with Amanda when I saw a news article on my phone about one of the online forums Derek had participated in being shut down by federal authorities. The investigation that started with Derek's case had expanded into a major operation targeting illegal surveillance footage trading. More than 50 men had been arrested across multiple states, and hundreds of victims had been identified and notified. The article included an interview with an FBI agent who said cases like mine, where victims discovered the surveillance and reported it, were critical to breaking apart these networks. I felt a complex mix of emotions reading that: pride that my actions had contributed to something larger, but also grief for all those hundreds of women who'd been violated without their knowledge. I hoped they were getting support and justice like I had. Derek served 4 years of his 6-year sentence before being released on parole with strict conditions, including continued therapy, restrictions on internet use, and regular check-ins with a parole officer. I only knew this because the victim notification system alerted me when he was released. Patricia had helped me get a permanent restraining order that prohibited Derek from contacting me or coming within 500 feet of my home or workplace. I didn't expect to ever see him again, but knowing he was out in the world made me anxious for several weeks after his release. My therapist and I worked through those feelings, and I gradually returned to the secure place I'd built for myself. Derek's life was essentially destroyed by his convictions, unable to work in tech anymore, permanently marked as a sex offender, struggling to rebuild anything resembling a normal existence. I felt no satisfaction in that, just a quiet certainty that his consequences were his own responsibility. 5 years after finding those cameras hidden in my apartment, I was engaged to a man named Daniel who I'd met through work. He was a respiratory therapist at the hospital, kind and patient and respectful of boundaries in ways I'd never experienced before. I told him everything about Derek and the surveillance on our third date, wanting him to know what he was getting into. Daniel listened carefully and said he understood why I was cautious about privacy and trust. He never pressured me to move faster than I was comfortable with and always asked permission before accessing anything that belonged to me. When we moved in together, I made him show me every device in his possession and explain what it did. He never complained or made me feel paranoid, just understood that rebuilding trust was a process. We created a home together that felt genuinely safe, where I never wondered if I was being watched or recorded, where privacy was sacred and respected. Looking back now, I understand that finding those cameras was both the worst and best thing that could have happened. Worst because of the violation and trauma it caused. Best because I discovered who Derek really was before we got married or had children or built even more of a life together. I'd given him a memory he'd never forget by holding him accountable and ensuring he faced full consequences for his predatory behavior. He'd spend the rest of his life marked as a sex offender, unable to escape what he'd done. Sometimes I thought about that night when I'd confronted him in the hallway and he'd begged me not to go to the police. I remembered the cold certainty I'd felt, the absolute conviction that he needed to face justice for violating not just me, but multiple women over years. I didn't regret that decision for a second. Some memories are meant to haunt the people who earned them. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.